I'm back with today a very special guest I met socially and not actually through work. His name is Ryan. We met at Soho House, not drinking, actually in the gym. And I find out this guy who can do handstands and cartwheels is actually a very, very serious data nerd professor. And we got to talking, and he tells me he's got this startup called Bilby AI.
That's it. Not just that, but I wear a suit, which convinced my mother that I have a job. Although it's really funny because, when I was a professor, I had to dress like it because I got a little bit sick. I worked for the government before I went back to academia. I got a bit sick of, people asking me to make them cups of tea and all that sort of stuff.
Where's your elbow patches?
Yeah, well, this is it. And so then I had to take my suits and put an elbow patch on them. And then suddenly I get out and now people are like, oh, you're a founder. Like, no one's going to take you seriously when you wear a suit. And I'm like, can we just get a consistent dress code in my life? Like, I just want something so my mum isn't embarrassed being like, yeah, my son Ryan, he does work. He does stuff. Anyhow, I should probably actually introduce myself.
Yes,
properly,
tell us.
So, hello, I'm Dr. Ryan Manuel. Yes. I was believe it or not, a professor of Chinese politics. I still teach the Chinese politics class to Hong Kong University. But I began life as a computer programmer and as a data analyst. And so what happened was from there, I worked for the government. I worked for a few prime ministers in Australia, did some various other things, but always really fascinated by this thing that I noticed that the Chinese government was like a giant computer program. And why don't we just turn it into a computer program? And so I left full-time academia 3 years ago to try and make this happen. And so that's how Bilby was sort of born. But then after that, we expanded to a bunch of other countries because the AI tools we needed to make to answer my original vision turned out to be useful for other things too. And thus I remain quote unquote gainfully employed. And that's what I tell my mum whenever I call home.
Yeah.
The one other thing you've got to say, we're fellow Australians as well. So our apologies to overseas listeners,
exactly.
to the lack of vowels, the dulcet tones, which will now assault your ears for the next half hour.
The words that will blend together.
Yeah, nah, what?
All right, mate.
Right, mate. Yeah. every statement of this podcast will end sounding like it's a question.
Right.
Right.
So on that note, Bilby.
Dulcet note, yeah.
Bilby is what?
Bilby is an Australian desert animal. Very good. This is the other great thing about dealing with Australians is that they get the joke. I'm from the desert. I'm literally from the desert. I grew up in a town in the middle of nowhere, which recently won the coveted and actually quite hard to win award of Australia's cheapest real estate.
Oh.
Its current economic development plan is to go to China and offer to bury their nuclear waste. Wow. Yeah, I mean that was the genesis story. Was growing up there.
You haven't been invaded by people from Sydney?
No, and one, it's about 2,500 k away and kilometres away, and two, it's Australia's cheapest real estate.
Exactly.
That's for a reason. Demand and supply works. Academic economists feel free to use this as an example in your first year, micro class. Actually, there's low demand, so there's a lot of supply in the desert. So turns out not many people want to live there. But it's a great place to grow up, and it has a very cute animal called a Bilby. A Bilby is a marsupial, and it digs into things, and it makes for a good logo. And yeah, that's how we got there basically.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit of this, and I've seen the tool, and not everyone here has. So maybe if you could just break it down, we could. If you send me some screenshots later, I can cut it in so that everyone can see it. But maybe give a bit of a description about what it does.
Yeah. So it's a platform that's trying to solve a big problem, and the big problem is that every government has to, in public, tell people what to do, but then every business entity, people dealing with government, they don't have the insider information of how to read those signals and do those signals. And then as the world has become more globalized, obviously also as we've reached sort of the geopolitical tensions that keep growing, these misunderstandings and this lack of access to information becomes more and more difficult. And so What we do, our tools do, is they create unique data. They listen to, they scrape, they take, gather everything that a government puts out across all the levels, local, central. So there's a giant data gathering exercise. And then we put it in one central place so that we can use artificial intelligence tools to make sense of all that data, to automatically translate, analyze, decode, do everything at light speed, rather than kind of having labs of people having to laboriously work through it. And then finally, we make that into products for people. So that includes auto analyst tools, so sort of analyst in a box. I'm trying to replace myself, basically, so that I never have to worry about dressing badly, and my mum really will worry about what I do for a living. And we provide that to various types of clients, multinationals, hedge funds, financial institutions. But at heart, it's just a very simple problem. Like, why don't we just read what people say? Why don't we, if we know what people are saying to their own people, then we might have better understanding across a whole bunch of countries, as sort of, pie in the sky as that may sound. And yeah, I mean, it's just the same problem I did as a professor, just using AI and at a slightly larger scale, I guess.
So the way I see it, and I've had the opportunity to look at the product,
which is wonderful, by the way, everyone, the best. Yeah, thanks. That's. Come on, mate.
I told him not to pitch, but he did anyway.
Is this called untold or shameless? Because definitely shameless is coming. Joking aside, sorry, I cut you off.
Well, I had a look at the product, and to simplify it for people, you take legislation and things that have been said in public, like policy addresses,
everything, newspapers, draft statements, official newspapers, which deviate often from other newspapers, blog posts, social media posts. And it's part of what's so fascinating about governments is, like, they've got a really hard problem to solve as well. They're also trying to solve a big problem. Like, if you assume good faith that a government is trying to make life better for its citizens, like, how on earth do you do that in China or India or Vietnam? Or
massive population.
Yeah, like massive population, different dialects, different interests. I mean, I can't even sell to one person. Like, how do I sell to 1.4 million or billion of them? Like, so yeah, we take everything in that sense. And then the AI is very good at, and we structure the data on the way in. But the advantage of artificial intelligence is not, it's actually in making it easier to access things and making it easier to put things out. So rather than just being able to put it out in English, you can put it out in any language. There's still, though, that part of you have to have unique IP. You have to talk to people a lot, and you have to find out where their pain points are. And then usually that's also something a government's trying to solve, right? Like, so we have, I think, 160 different mediums, as in of information. And most countries, there's about 3,000-4,000 processes running continuously running just to bring in the data. So
for a business, presumably, like, Jonathan Nguyen's not going to be like searching this database, but for a business, they're probably looking for answers for issues before they enter a market, I guess, or how do you see that?
I mean, part of the interesting thing about having a platform is that you're trying to hit different, you can actually hit different needs at once. So there's market entry problems that people have. AI is very good for that. It can instantly synthesize the tax codes of 4 different jurisdictions and tell you which one is most suited to Jonathan Yen's particular business. But there's other parts as well of just prediction, knowing what's coming, not because you can magically see the future, but because the government has already had to tell people, people have to get ready. You have to prepare the ground always. And so what's really hard if you're a business or even an analyst wanting to go somewhere new is you don't have that context, that background, that sort of thing. And that's where I think technology can really improve the world, right? Like, it's instant context, it's instant analysis, it's instant translation, and what your factory does you knew your business better than anyone. But imagine you had 1,000 sort of Vietnamese interns working for you who all did exactly what you said 24/7, and that's where tech can fill in the void, I think, really powerfully. So
it's like, having seen the system, it's almost like magic, right? Because you've worked for prime ministers, I've worked for government. Certainly, when you have teams of people trying to read the tea leaves of like, okay, well, he said this, but what does this mean? Like, what's the broader context?
And not just that, but also people making livings out of reading tea leaves. Like there's a very good soothsayer industry out there, and it's very hard to get that. Like, that is specialized knowledge, but like we need to make that available to everyone.
Yeah.
And so governments, working in senior offices in the government and even in businesses, like your org chart tends to take over.
Yeah.
And there's so much incredibly good IP just trapped. There's so much stuff that's trapped in different pockets. Software is, that's what software is good at. What software isn't good at is figuring out the stuff in the first place. It's a broadcast mechanism. It's not an engine in that sense. But at reconciling everyone's interests, at getting everyone on the same page, at getting information together, at then distributing information out and flattening the curve so that the best idea can actually win. I mean, tech is magical. Yeah. And so, like, when you see it at the end and you're like, oh, what's just trying to think about X? It's like, oh, wow, that's magic. And you're like, well, it is, but it's just like having, it's still built on humans. It's still built on IP and on that sort of stuff. It's just that data doesn't sleep. It doesn't lie. It doesn't, it doesn't worry that the sort of EL2 boss, sorry, that's an Australian government term for those of you who have not been unfortunate enough to have to sift through all these years of bureaucracy, that their boss might not like this thing. This is what China's government said. How you deal with that, how you interpret that, that's difficult to say. But this is a leading indicator. We know that because they've done it 6 times in the past. This is what usually happens. This is what they said. This is that in Swahili. Tech. Tech should do that. That's what tech should do. That's what it's... it should serve us. Like, it should be
That's a conversation for a much longer podcast.
Yeah, it's true.
You've won a few awards. Most recently, there has been a pitch competition for the global... Was it a global startup?
We did win that, although I have to say, as my staff reminded me, I didn't win that. I tend to lose them much more. And it's actually my star head of product won that. But yeah, we've won some awards. We've won a few 4 or 5 competitions. Yeah.
And so now your name is out there. It looks like you've been an overnight success.
Because nothing says success like, you personally not winning a pitch competition, and then look, there's no such thing. It's one... What's success? That's a much, much longer conversation. But more importantly, it looks
easy.
Yeah, it doesn't even look easy. It just looks like a thing. But it's just, it's you actually get there from all the pitch decks. So as my staff, the one that Jonathan's referring to was a Hong Kong one, and the competition before that, literally 1 month before that, I went to another competition run by a government agency, and this people who didn't even have they took a certain type of consumer good and they brought it into Hong Kong and they repackaged it. But they were smart enough to have like a very attractive person go and give samples, and they won this competition. And like my staff come back and they're, what is wrong with you? How are you like, you can't even pitch well. What is your job in this organization? So even, one, there's no such thing. 2, it never stops. 3, you're not really that successful. And 4, the failure is what actually makes it look like you're successful. Not because you've become a success, but it's just because you've gotten the wrong 5 times beforehand, and then magically the 6th time you're like, oh, right, finally.
How long have you been? How long have you been at this now?
I mean, how long have I been at the idea that we should use technologies to read what governments say and figure it out? 20 years. How long have I been building this? I left academia to have, a notion of just like, maybe we should try this 3-4 years ago. Bilby as an entity, we've been selling for 18 months. And so we look by startup standards, it looks fast. Part of that is though that the 20 years beforehand meant that I had met people along the way, and they already had bought into what I was trying to do. And so when I was like, oh, hey, we got a bit of money, you want to come work for me? They were like, oh, totes. Yeah. But it's so far off being successful, and so not about like the main success in a startup, I literally think, is just waking up in the morning not in abject terror, but just in a mild state of anxiety. Like that's it's going from this, and part of that is just being like, well, it was really nice to win, and we're looking forward to to talking to lots of more people and more people getting to see what we do. But it's not, it's not thinking of that as the giant high.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, like, the next second when they're doing scaffolding on the building next door, so you've got 4 months of jackhammers going next to you without telling you, and there's a leak and there's a cockroach infestation, and like literally you walk back to the office in your suit getting ready to do the dishes every day. Like that's what it is actually.
You never tell me.
That's what I mean. Like, that's the thing. Like, you have to just believe in what you're trying to make, and then you make it the best you can. And if you've made something in the world, that's a success. And anyone, I don't care what it is, if you come to me and you're like, I made this thing, like, man, that's incredible.
Yeah. It's not easy making
it's not,
a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, hats off to you.
So what's the biggest hurdle you've come across?
Dealing with those ups and downs. Dealing with the reality, dealing with the fact that there are umpteen hurdles and that there's just another bunch of mountains after this mountain. But I think the biggest one is also, and it's in, there's a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram between the sort of ups and downs problem, is just believing in yourself. And you can't believe in yourself as in like, I'm Ryan, I'm awesome. You have to just believe that like, okay, this product is good. This will make something, and that something is worth whatever, cockroach infestation, dishes problem I'm dealing. Whatever I'm facing right now, the future will be better. We will make something, and after that, like, the chips will fall where they may.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question to ask a founder, because I have a few rules, but first rule is not every person should be a founder.
I think
you can have a good idea, doesn't mean you're a founder.
Well, 100%, and also even if you have a good idea and you make a really good founder, that's like what, 1% of the start. I think though we need to get away from the idea of there is a good founder or a good this. This is like the history problem of the great man of history versus the structural thing. I think we just need to be like, there's this thing, I wrote books before I sort of made companies, I guess, which is as a professor. And there was this thing that you noticed when you're writing a book where like the universe just gave you the right path, but you just had to just keep staying in that game. You just had to stay on that path. You just had to keep turning every page, as that great Robert Caro quote goes. Like, and the founder is just the vessel for the idea. And you can be a flawed, cracked vessel that tries to cover it up with a suit. Hi, Mom. But if your idea is good, an early mentor of mine, an old boss of mine, I mean, I probably still really do work for him. I never. 20 years later, he taught me this thing where he's just like, Ryan, in the long run, ideas always win. He's like, nah. Maybe you win from this idea, maybe you don't. But he's like, in the long run, you have to bet that ideas will always win.
Yeah.
And in my typical cocky young man thing, I was like, oh yeah. Like, I'm awesome. Like, I got this, man. Like, yeah, whatever, boss. Like, just let me write this memo. You'll see. I think that like it's the same for a startup. Like in the long run, the product will always win. Just keep going, make more stuff, and forget about you. Forget about you as the founder. Forget about like what are you trying to do? And like, because if you just think about, am I a good founder? One, you'll never get out of bed, and two, people won't follow you, and then three, you yourself. The flip side may think that you're so good at being a founder if you are lucky enough to get a bit of success that you forget that you need a team around you. You need, you brought up this thing that we won. I didn't do it.
Your team did it.
My team did.
Yeah.
Like literally. And if you are focused on you, I find that conversation hard to have. Whereas if you're focused on what you're trying to make, and I'm really focused on what you're trying to make, like, it's just a nice, easy North Star. Like, is this good for what we're trying to do? Yes, no. Why are you coming to me then? You know that. You know that answer. Like,
that's what I mean by this, founder is not for everyone, because actually you have to sign up to take out the garbage and still believe every day.
Yeah. But by the same token as well, you have to believe.
Yeah.
And you have to not get stuck in the pity party of like, I'm onto my 4th credit card because I keep using them to pay off the other 3 credit cards. Look, laugh all you want, man. And then even worse, you have to not be on that thing of being like, I'm rubbish, because you have to walk into that room being like,
yep,
I made this thing. And like, this thing,
it's awesome.
Yeah. Like get amongst it, like, sorry, more Australian slang for that. And then the flip side of that, though, is you have to take and this is getting back to my point about the roller coaster, you have to take the losses, and there will be so many losses, and just be like, this isn't me. It's that the thing wasn't ready, and this is how we're going to get it ready next time. And I think finding that kind of blend of just insane arrogance to think that you can do something in the world with the deep humility of being like, yeah, this is going to suck, and tomorrow's going to suck, and the day after that's going to suck, and probably suck some more.
Basically, you just got to be a stoic.
I don't know, because Stoics make
classic Stoic,
because
right?
Stoics made bad salespeople. This is genuine. No, I read a ton of Marcus Aurelius. In fact, I like to say hello to my old office mate at Boston Consulting Group, who used to like, every morning he'd be like Marcus Aurelius, and sort of, because I liked him so much. Hi Ben. Marcus Aurelius was a rubbish sales guy. He's as an administrator, he wasn't great, and what did he make? He wrote a beautiful book. Yeah. Meditations are stunning. I even read it in Latin when I was at high school. That's how nerdy I am.
Such a nerd.
Hey, I'm cool. All right, yeah. But if you focus on what you're trying to make rather than who you're trying to be, it's just so much easier. Like he's just asking the wrong set of questions to me for a startup founder. Like, I'm irrelevant. Like, if I'm happy, if I'm sad, like I need to think about that solely from, does this help my product? Does this help me make something?
Lessons in startups and life.
No, but it's true. You need to think like that, I think. You just need to almost like take yourself out of the picture. Just
serve the mission.
Yeah. Renwin Fu, serve the people. Yeah. But I tend to like think as little about myself as possible almost, and I try to not dwell. I just and if it's bad, tomorrow's gonna be better, and let's just get through this. And
comes with age too, I think. I was a different man when I was younger.
Yeah, I was. I don't know if it even comes with age. It comes with deep failure. Like an acknowledgement of kind of, been there, done that, been in this hole before. We'll get out. Yeah.
So okay. Out of this, we've been at this tech game. I think this whole startup tech thing has been around for now. I remember my first bubble of 99. Why today? What makes now the right time to deploy this type of tech? And I can probably guess your answer somewhat, but I want to hear it from you.
I don't think there's ever a good time. I actually think the reverse. I think if you sit waiting for time or you're waiting for thing, then you violate like Ryan's one and only rule of a startup: make something. Like, it's about you got to like. Can you see the problem? Can you see where to do it? You know, are you annoyed enough about it that you can deal with the like fourth credit card when you used to be a professor problem, right? Like, as in, can you deal with that? If you can do that, then just pull the trigger, right? Like, but if you kind of are constantly worried about the rest of the world, then, you know, one, by the time you've actually made the thing, it would have moved on. Two, you know, you're going to have that founder problem of being like, hi, this is where the market is, but like, you know, they want more salespeople, but I'm better at like a broader marketing perspective. So, yeah, and I've got this safe job, and, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, I'm single, maybe be nice to actually like be able to date some, or I've got a kid come. It never ends. Whereas if you're just like, I can do this, do it. Like, it's just see ball, hit ball, right? Like, I don't think in timing. I don't think it's 100% true that you will have really good timing come to you. Like now for our business, amazing. But we were doing the same stuff a year ago. Yeah. It's just that it was much harder to find analogies that people could understand. Yeah. People were like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, we're doing a combination of supervised and unsupervised machine. Whereas now they're like, so it's like ChatGPT, but for China's government, and you're like, better. And with Google, they're like, whoa, you know, and everyone's like, wow. But it's the same problem we're trying to solve. It's the same thing we're trying to do. Like, I think timing is less about like, there'll be good times, there'll be rubbish times. Just don't die. Stay in the game. You know, make something, stay in the game. Everything else is just the ups and downs part. I'm very...
That's a very founder way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's 100%.
It's definitely, I would say, an investor would turn and say, you're not the right time to invest right now.
But that's one of the issues that investors have to face. Like, investors have a really tough job of they have to see what's the needle in the haystack. Because we all look the same, right? I mean, it's funny how... you know, the same pitch will resonate or not resonate, or my background will be this or my background will be that. And sometimes it'll be an advantage and sometimes it'll be a disadvantage. And like, you know, investors, though, in the long run, you have to believe in the idea, and you have to hope that investors do too. And that's where your job is to give that to an investor in a 2-minute, 45-second PowerPoint deck. A PowerPoint deck they'll look at for 2 minutes and 45 seconds. And even if you do that job brilliantly, there's going to be people that are like, you're not my bag. Yeah. That's okay. Like, I mean, how does an investor tell whether something is going to work or not work? Like, your job as the founder is to make something that doesn't exist before. How on earth can someone evaluate that? Like, it's an incredibly hard job. I mean, I don't know that if I would make a great investor, because the skill set is different.
It's different. Yeah. It's also a particular type of investor as well. So
good point.
Most of what we talk about is with VC investment. We have particular metrics like 10x, 100x, whatever, over X horizon. If you make if you've got a personal experience, my first startup was essentially Google Workspace. Yeah. But I came up with the idea in 2000. Technology didn't exist. Yeah. The internet speeds didn't exist. Yeah. I exited. A very simple trade sale, didn't make any money, covered my losses, went and got a job and face planted into the sand on a beach for like 2 years.
Yeah. But part of that, actually, I think that's a very good critique though of what I said before about, you know, timing. Capital is definitely a separate thing. Like, you know, I gave you the very founder, you know, make something, yeah, kumbaya. But capital is different. You know, there are times in your business when you need that money, and that money and you need to think of how you're going to spend and deploy and allocate it in a way that gets you to the vision. And that's a real skill set. Like that is, and yeah, I've had to teach myself that, because there is a huge why now that matters in terms of cost of capital versus rates of return versus future value of money.
Especially now, right?
Especially now, right? But then by the same token, especially now, AI is so sexy. China, AI, government, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And so, I've got to show that I need this money now to do X in a way that will get you to Y, that will still keep me going in my vision. Yeah. And that's where kind of investors and founders, when it works, it works. Yeah. Because you learn so much from having to do that.
Your timing on this thing is very serendipitous because I hope most pundits think we could be going into recession, we could be coming out of recession. Either way, it's a good time.
Yeah. There could always be surprises. Yeah, good prediction, bro. Yeah.
I'm a great economist.
I'm a professor. Tell me about the flaws of your methodological principles.
I learned from the best. So I remember watching. I remember the economists at JP Morgan, market strategists.
Yeah.
If you actually listen, it's always like it could be this, but it could also be this.
Yeah, But there can always be surprises. Yeah. It's funny when I went to work for the government. They literally spent 8 hours a day just trying to beat us if we ever did that. They're like, no one needs that. Tell them what do you think. Sorry. So we may be going into recession. We may not be going into recession.
And I think your timing is serendipitous. So good luck, you. So the timing looks good for this at the moment. Why do you think that? I mean, you're based in Hong Kong, which is a counterintuitive place to set up an AI startup, but it's not a counterintuitive place to set up a China-focused startup. So unpack that a little bit for me. How has that impacted, your?
I mean, it goes back to your point before on timing and my kind of, hopefully not too boring rant about there isn't such a thing as timing. I was in Hong Kong. I was a professor in Hong Kong. I met people in Hong Kong. I could see the market need. I built a model. It got some early results. Banks liked those. Suddenly, I had to make a company. AI at that point in Hong Kong was not attractive. Right now, AI is incredibly attractive in Hong Kong, contrary to what you might think, because, I have access to, as long as you can read and write Chinese, you have access to everything that's happening over the mainland, which is a fascinating ecosystem, and they do some things very, very well. Yeah. And you have access to everything that's happening in the West, which is also a fascinating ecosystem, does some things very well. You have capital, you have everything, you have people to talk to. It could be the AI hub of the world, and I've bored you and many other people with this rant before. The point, though, is that people make companies, and the human side of stuff, to me, again, matters much more than necessarily where you are. One of our investors is the CEO of the bank I was talking about before, and he taught me this really well. He's just like, I'd come to him and be like, oh, but we're doing this, but like Hong Kong, and he'd just be like, Ryan, where's the wallet? Where's the problem you're trying to solve? And I'm like, well, it's in the Middle East. He's like, well, why don't you just do it? And then so, I built that model. We built it for the Middle East, and then sure enough, like that solved the problem. Everyone moved on. Life got better. Like if I'd sat there and been like, oh, I'm in Hong Kong, I just do China, I do this, like the good startup should, as in, concentrate on one thing, probably wouldn't have worked. And I think Hong Kong in that sense is a very good place to be, because there are people who think like that, who get you to think globally, who get you to think about, where's the wallet? Where's the problem? Is it a generalizable? Is it a global problem? How do we get it out of Hong Kong as fast as possible into the world? But it's also not such a good place to be, because there's not that human capital, that nurturing. I don't mean nurturing as in, everyone gets a hug, but I do think that it's really important that you look at like, what are the incentives to start a startup? What are the incentives to be a founder? Like even, when you're like, oh, that's a very founder perspective, and straight away I'm like, oh no, man, no, cool, man. I look like I wear suits. I talk about IRR. Like investors love me, trust me. Like, and it's because in Hong Kong there's not, the human just. I have this great line I stole from you. All decisions are emotional decisions. Yeah. If you are going to make something, a human will have to Not just make it. A human will have to sign off on the check. A human will sign off on your first ticket if you invest. A human will sign off on a big contract, or, not so much obviously if you're B2B SaaS, sort of on a smaller ticket size. But yeah, I think Hong Kong in that sense it's a place. It has strengths. It has weaknesses. I happened to be here. But I'm still very bullish on Hong Kong because of the human capital is high. I just think we need to get a bit better at sort of massaging that human capital.
So this is the last question. It's hard.
I'm a professor, so I'll take credit for answering. My apologies to the viewers. To everyone sitting at home, I promise I'll shut up soon. I promise.
This is a hard question because it requires you to think a little bit further forward, and you may have already done this, but in somewhere 2030, 2040, what's the one big thing you're hoping to change with Bilby?
That's it. It's just that people look at governments the same way they look at markets. 20, 30 years ago, bond prices. How did you get a bond price? You had to call up all the different bond. It's just madness. And then Bloomberg put it all together and frankly did a darn good job. Made a very good business, fantastic customer service, all that sort of stuff. Good investors, the works. But then that built a hedge fund industry that's on high frequency trading that relies on instant information. I just want people to know what governments think. It drives me crazy when it's just like, look, China's going to do this. India. You're just like, look, why don't we just read what they say? Why don't we think about this from a risk perspective? How do we not quantify it, because only quantification matters, but how do we make this accessible to people? So every decision, you don't have that black box. You don't have that soothsayer. You don't that's the dream. And to go back to your question on why now, now is, you're seeing the tools exist, things exist. It can be done. It's not far away. Because frankly, again, we did it for markets. Just do it for governments. It's such an impact on people's lives. And yet we don't know what they do, what they say. We don't even read it. It's just sitting on the ground waiting for us to make something of it. I think that's where I see these things going. And I don't think it's even 2040. I will get there by 2030. It's just how do things, so there's many different factors. That doesn't mean it's going to be some amazing, maybe the company isn't giant by 2030 or something like that. But I think the problem will be solvable, and it's solvable soon. So going back to my whole argument, if you think the problem's solvable and you think you can make something that solves it, then my responsibility is just to do it. Fingers crossed. Hold me accountable, everybody.
Yeah, he said it here.
I have a job, Mum.
He just wears a suit and goes to the office. An office.
Hey, I have an office, all right? All those startup founders out there. All those people sleeping on the floor of their office tonight. You are my friend, believe me. There's a reason I wear a suit. It's because people don't guess that.
All right, Ryan. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
See you next time.
Thanks. Yeah, hopefully. If you have me back.
We'll have you back. We'll do a debrief. We'll follow up on all the claims you made and see whether you followed through.
Yeah. Note, this is not investment advice, and prior performance does not indicate future. Exactly. Insert disclaimers here.
See you later.
Cheers.